Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. My name is Jody Freed. I'm the Executive Director at Catamount Film and Arts in St. Johnsbury, and I'm the chair of the Vermont Creative Network steering team. And I'm actually up here in Burke at the Hotel and Conference Center at the NEK Together conference with 200 folks and having a whole other conversation around the way arts and creativity fit into the region here in the Northeast Kingdom. I'm looking out the window at the ski slopes, which are covered in snow. So welcome to a snowy day here. I'm going to just briefly introduce things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Susan. But today we're going to be presenting research and data that paints the picture about the tremendous impact the creative sector has here in Vermont, both on our economy and our communities. You're going to see examples of that work in action. We're going to offer some ideas to you about how to use the information that we're presenting in your advocacy around the state. Some housekeeping. We are recording today's program and we post it on our website. And this event is being closed captioned. And the event is being live captioned by white coat captioning. To view the captions, click on the closed captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then click on the show subtitles option. You can also select a full page view of the captions by clicking on the link that's posted in the chat box below. This will open captions in a separate browser for you to view. So introductions in chat. We would love for you, before we get started here, to just quickly give us your name, which organization you're with, and the town that you're currently in, and throw that into chat so we can start a dialogue here with everybody who's participating in the webinar. So let's just take a moment and everybody put that into chat. Hey, thank you everybody I see them flowing in here. We got a great group from all across the state. So welcome to everybody. We're going to do questions at the end of the presentation. So you can feel free to put your questions at any point into chat and we'll keep track of them. And then we'll make time at the end to do that. So now that we've gone through the housekeeping, I am going to just turn things over to the Executive Director of the Vermont Arts Council, Susan Evans McClure. And Susan, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Jody. Hi, everyone. It's great to be gathered here today. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, that didn't work. Sorry. I thought I was all prepped and ready to go. I'm going to share this screen. You'd think after however many years in we are to Zoom, but here we are. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Jody for the warm welcome. My name is Susan Evans McClure. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Arts Council. I am new-ish to this position, so happy to see some familiar faces joining today and excited to meet those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet yet as well. The Vermont Arts Council recognizes that we gather here in Indakana, the traditional and unsurrendered homeland of the Abenaki people. Please join us in acknowledging their history and ancestors, their enduring presence, and their future generations. So this morning we'll be talking a bit about the Vermont Creative Network and our work collectively across the state trying to assess the economic impact that our incredible industry has for everyone. So the Vermont Creative Network is a collaborative statewide effort to bring together Vermont's creative sector, to quantify its impact, and to advocate for its growth in the future. Creativity is essential to the cultural and economic vitality of our state. And what the Creative Network does is facilitate advocacy, research, and networking for the creative sector. And who or what exactly is the creative sector? Well, that is the enterprises, the organizations, and the individuals whose products and services are rooted in artistic and creative content, which in our amazing state is a pretty huge group of people. The Vermont Creative Network's vision for Vermont is that arts, culture, and creativity are essential Vermont infrastructure, that Vermont communities thrive through creative expression and enterprise, and that creative enterprises succeed in a diverse, equitable, connected, and collaborative environment. So with all of you, that is what we are working to build across the state. And today, we're going to talk about some numbers and some data, specifically new data from the Arts and Economic Prosperity 6 survey. We'll talk about the impact of all that data. What does that look like in communities? And how is our creative economy making a difference? And then we'll talk about how you all can use those stories to make the case in your communities for the continued support of the creative sector across the state. So what is AEP 6? The newly released Arts and Economic Prosperity 6 survey, also known as AEP 6, because everything needs an acronym, of course. So AEP 6 is an economic and social impact study of the nation's nonprofit arts and culture industry based on data collected in 2022. The survey has been conducted on a regular basis. This is the 6th time for about 30 years. And AEP 6 provides detailed findings on 373 regions from all states and Puerto Rico, ranging in population from 4,000 to 4 million, and representing rural, suburban, and large urban communities. It's important to note as we dig into this data that AEP 6 is just looking at nonprofits, both national and in Vermont. And it's just a snapshot in time. All of this data was collected in 2022. So during COVID, nonprofits and for-profits in the creative sector united together to make the case that our sector is stronger when we talk about our impact collectively, no matter our tax status. And while the results of AEP 6 are meaningful and there's some exciting data in here, it's important to keep in mind that these results are only for the nonprofit sector, and really the creative sector is much more encompassing than that in Vermont. Speaking of national data, let's look at some of it. So nationally in 2022, nonprofit arts and culture organizations and their audiences generated $151.7 billion in economic activity, over $73 billion in spending by the organizations themselves, which leveraged an additional $78.4 billion in event-related spending by their audiences. This economic activity's impact is far-reaching, supporting 2.6 million jobs across the country, generating over $29 billion in tax revenue to local, state, and federal governments. AEP 6 sends a strong signal that when we support the arts, we are investing in both economic and community well-being. The survey also looked at social impact and found overwhelmingly that audiences deeply value the work of nonprofit arts and culture organizations, with 86% of respondents saying that the arts and culture are, quote, important to their community's quality of life and livability, and 72% agreeing that arts and culture provide shared experiences with people of different races, ethnicities, ages, and beliefs. So lots of good things. The state of the creative economy is strong. I've always wanted to say that the state of the state is strong, and I think it's as close as we're going to get because it's true in this case. But what does that look like specifically in Vermont? So 120 nonprofit organizations in Vermont collected data at live events over several seasons in 2022. Libraries, music performances, museums, theaters, and all sorts of live events collected visitor data in a rigorous process. A huge thank you to the many organizations who participated in this process. It was a heavy lift of people doing extra work to get this data, and this data is really valuable. And as we'll see, many of our nonprofit organizations are operating, doing more with less throughout all of the incredible work that they do. And this was another thing that was asked of them. And hopefully this data can provide some real value for that time put into collecting it. A special thank you to our partners who conducted specific regional surveys in Greater Burlington, Greater Rutland, and the Upper Valley. Thank you to the teams at Burlington City Arts, Paramount Theater, and the Upper Valley Business Alliance for going the extra mile on these regional surveys as well. So in the state of Vermont, the sector generated $158.6 million in economic activity during 2022. $103.2 million of that was actually spent by arts and culture organizations, and an additional $55.4 million was spent in event-related expenditures by the audiences themselves. That economic activity supported 2,712 jobs, provided $112.8 million in personal income to residents, and generated almost $35 million in tax revenue to local, state, and federal governments. Nonprofit arts and culture organizations are businesses. They employ people locally, they purchase supplies and services from nearby businesses, and they engage in marketing and promotion of their cities and regions. They're very active doing business, creating, presenting, exhibiting, engaging, has a positive economic impact, and improves community well-being. The arts and culture also drive commerce to local businesses. There were 1.4 million attendees to arts and culture events put on by nonprofits in Vermont, and 75% of those attendees were local, and 25% were non-local. And of those non-local audiences, 80%, 79.4% to be exact, reported that the primary purpose of their visit to Vermont was specifically to attend the performance, event, exhibit, venue, or facility they were visiting. So when people attend a cultural event, we've all seen this, many of us have done it, they make an outing of it. Dining at a restaurant, paying for parking or public transportation, enjoying some dessert out after the show, returning home to pay for childcare or pet care. And overall, in the state of Vermont, attendees spent $34.53 per person per event beyond the cost of admission. If you were a local attendee who was someone who lived near the venue. If you're a non-local attendee, on average, on top of your cost of admission, you're spending $51.69 per person per event. And of particular note, in Burlington, those non-local audiences are spending $77.80 per person per event, which is a lot of spending happening in our local towns and communities. Arts and culture also strengthen the visitor economy. In the state of Vermont, we just saw that 25% of non-local visitors We saw that 25% of visitors are non-local visitors who traveled from outside of the state to get here. They spend an average of 79% more than local attendees as a result of their attendance to nonprofit arts and culture events in the state of Vermont. And additionally, to hammer this one home, 79.4% of them reported that they came here specifically because of that arts and culture event. And as would be expected from a traveler, these non-locals are spending more in categories like lodging, meals, and transportation. When a community attracts cultural tourists, local merchants and businesses are reaping the rewards. But it's not just about dollars. The arts and culture organizations surveyed really contribute to the community pride in the state of Vermont. 87% of arts and culture attendees agreed that the activity or venue where they were surveyed is, quote, inspiring a sense of pride in the neighborhood and community. Almost 86% agreed that they would feel a great sense of loss if this activity or venue were no longer available. And over 80% agreed that their venue or facility is an important pillar within the community. These are responses from people who were attending these live events. So there's definitely a little confirmation bias here. They were already there, but it's really nice to see that this work is meaningful for people attending these events. And it really tracks with what all of us hear from our patrons and community members, and the way that our communities are supporting arts and culture organizations. So Americans for the Arts was very clear with us that the study has changed this time around, and that it's really not ideal to make direct comparisons to previous AEP studies. They changed the methodology, and they specifically expanded the kinds of organizations that they surveyed to include more cultural organizations. Americans for the Arts says that AEP 6 represents a total reset, establishing a new benchmark in the AEP study series. So they expanded the criteria from just arts to arts and culture. They implemented a new data collection method, and they asked our partners to use new community engagement tools, adding social impact questions to the survey instruments, and they moved to an economic impact modeling to something called the IMPLAN platform. And they specifically called out that not only did they make these kind of statistical methodological changes, but they really called out that the world around us has changed since the last time this national survey happened. The COVID-19 pandemic occurred. There's been an economic ups and downs since then. Audiences decreased, audience attendance habits changed, and the arts and hospitality industry suffered profound job losses during the pandemic. And then, of course, billions of federal dollars were distributed to the arts and cultural sector from pandemic relief through multiple rounds, which were really important to our sector. So in Vermont, with all of those caveats, we did take a look at AEP 5 because we're one of the smaller survey regions overall. we were able to see, where those increases were. And what we found in looking at AEP5 was that overall industry expenditures are up around 30%. But there's about 36% fewer jobs in arts and culture than there were the last time the survey was conducted. Overall, attendance in Vermont is pretty stable, which is really exciting, especially considering the kind of dramatic attendance statistics people are seeing around the country and dramatic declines. In Vermont, attendance by locals is down about 10%, but attendance by non-locals at arts and culture events is up about 50%. And spending is up also per attendee. So numbers are nice, but what does this tell us? So overall, this data really tracks with what we're hearing from people in the sector and what we're all experiencing in our own lives. Costs are up, right? Everything is more expensive. Costs for supplies, materials, healthcare, salaries. The cost of doing business is just higher than it was before the pandemic. But we're also hearing that some organizations have not fully staffed up back to pre-pandemic levels, both because they're not in a stable place to do so yet, and also because they can't find the staff to hire. And if they do find the staff, they don't have housing for those staff either. And yet, arts and culture organizations are doing even more programs for more people. One thing we're specifically looking at is the impact and sustainability of this approach for the staff of arts and culture nonprofits, right? We're all doing more with less. All of our staff are being pushed more to deliver more for communities who really need them after the pandemic. And we're wanting to make sure that we're looking at the sustainability of that, both from a human impact side and a programmatic impact side and a community impact side. But of course, the human side first. Arts and culture, and people who work in the arts and culture are incredibly dedicated and hardworking, and we want those really talented people to stay working in this field and to stay in Vermont. So what all of this really says is that the COVID recovery is ongoing. There was a huge seismic shift in our field during COVID that honestly, we're not always sure exactly what is coming next. Audience habits have clearly changed. Who is even buying tickets ahead anymore? Although they should be, it would make all of our lives a lot less stressful. But the demand for live arts experiences is out there, and it has a real economic impact. So how does this AEP6 survey compare with other economic impact data? So all of the AEP6 survey is great. And there's other data out there about economic impact that tells a broader sector-wide picture of the impact of Vermont's creative economy. So we look at AEP6 data to really help us understand some visitor behavior, the amount of money people are spending, the impact it's having in people's communities. And also we want to look broader, not just the nonprofit sector, but also for-profit businesses and creative entrepreneurs. So, and this is a little bit of breaking news because my data and slide here is 2021 data from the US Bureau of Economic Analysis that reported that the arts and culture in Vermont account for $1.1 billion and 3% of Vermont's economy, contributing over 10,000 jobs. I will say that new data released from the National Association of State Arts Agencies, I kid you not, this morning, so not quite enough time for me to update my slide, has actually the arts and culture being the second largest industry sector in the state of Vermont. So we will be looking at that and updating this. We'll update this presentation when we post the slides on the website as well with the newer data, if it's changed. But all of that is to say that the arts and culture are a very significant sector, economic sector in the state of Vermont. Right up there, the top three are construction, retail, and arts and culture. To me, this US Bureau of Economic Analysis data is more comprehensive data on creative sector jobs. But it also doesn't diminish the value of the economic impact data of AEP6, especially when it comes to the data around spending and habits of attendees. And I think that Catherine is going to put in someone from the Arts Council is going to put in the chat the link to this new updated National Association of State Arts Agencies data page for Vermont. So while it is all good to talk about numbers, what does all of this actually look like? Jody and I are going to share a few examples of what this looks like around the state and what it looks like when our creative economy is really in action. These examples are just going to scratch the surface of the breadth and impact of the creative economy throughout the state. And at the end, when we get to Q&A, we'd love to hear more from all of you about examples that you're seeing in your communities. So we've all seen the creative sector invigorate our smallest towns. And one great example of that is the work of Huntington Valley Arts in the very small town of Huntington with just around 2,000 residents. The first Friday of each month, they are a catalyst for a community-wide celebration that brings many, many locals into the town center, which I'll be honest, is not that large of a town center. They host a craft fair, and the local general store hosts a craft beer tasting and serves hot dogs made from local meat and created by a local butcher and catering company. The local library right across the street usually gets involved with free programming for families as well. For a very small town, this is a regular large gathering where people are supporting artists, buying local, and seeing their neighbors in ways that never happen on an average Friday night. And this First Fridays or gallery walk model is happening all around the state in Montpelier, Brattleboro, White River Junction, Randolph, Burlington, and other towns of all sizes. It's a great way to use creativity to spark connection and drive the local economy. And this is the creative sector activating the local economy at work. And in Brattleboro, the creative sector is at the forefront of downtown redevelopment at High Street and Green, a real estate development project dedicated to crafting a vibrant multi-use hub for creativity in downtown Brattleboro. The building is 80% occupied with 4 and nonprofit creative enterprises, including the Hatch Space, Vermont Center for Photography, Wheelhouse Play Center, a Vermont Table, and more. It's a great model of bringing together creative for-profit and nonprofit businesses to learn and build together, all while redeveloping a downtown building. So the creative sector is really key to our downtown redevelopment work across the state. The Heritage Winooski Mill Museum is using the strengths of the creative sector to bring people together and build community through shared creative experiences. In partnership with the Association of Africans Living in Vermont, the Stitch Together group meets twice a month to offer refugee women from East Africa an outlet to learn new knitting skills, socialize, make new community connections, and heal together. The program grew out of the museum's Welcome Blanket Project, a nationwide project where fiber artists create blankets to welcome refugees to the US. And these new knitters are connecting to creativity and connecting to each other. The creative sector here is building the bonds that strengthen our communities. And now I'll turn it back over to Jody to talk about how the creative sector is catalyzing change in Vermont to help solve our housing crisis. Jody.
Did I successfully make it back? Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit today with you and share a project that we're really excited about that we've been working on for the last, it's been over 2 years. And we're working with the Northern Forest Center, which is an organization that works across the border states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and has a very large footprint and has historically worked in the areas of agriculture and working with outdoor recreation. But as the housing issue has become bigger and bigger in our rural communities, the Northern Forest Center has seen that that is a very important place for them to be bringing resources and helping to create positive change. They have been doing projects. They have one in Lancaster, New Hampshire. They have different housing projects scattered around where they're doing these pilot programs. And one of them is in St. Johnsbury, and they've identified this building at 560 Railroad Street, which at one point was an armory. At one point it was a dance hall. It's a historic building that has been in town for over 100 years. And they've purchased the building and they're moving forward with a multi-million-dollar redevelopment where they're going to create 10 at-market, mid-market range housing units. They'll be kind of condo style, anywhere from 1 to 3 bedroom, that will be geared towards renting to working professionals in the community that they have. They believe there's a housing need for that in St. Johnsbury, and our data has shown that. Where Catamount has come in and what I'd like to share with you today is the deliberate and intentional involvement of the arts with a real estate developer, where they are moving forward with pilot plans to then replicate in other places. And the idea is that the arts become a very significant partner in the project, and would be in projects moving forward. So this is a place where we look at cross-sector leverage points and where the arts, culture, and creativity can look to partner and with other areas to solve problems in Vermont, but also to create relationships. And so what we've done is working with the Northern Forest Center. We are going to be, if you look at that picture of the building that's up, we're going to be leasing one of the commercial spaces, which will be right to the right of that front door. It will be a 900 square foot new studio space with a sink and an area to display. And then there's going to be an attached residential 1-bedroom unit that will be available for the artist and a direct doorway into it. So this will be creating, as part of the design of the building, an artist in residence studio. Additionally, throughout the building, in its interior, there's going to be gallery space on the open walls and hallways. And then on the exterior, the large wall that you see to the left, we're going to be designing panel murals that will be able to be installed. And then in the front garden area, there'll be a place for 3-dimensional statue and other types of artwork to be displayed in front of the building. The idea is that this housing unit will become a living arts and creative experiment over time, that the artist who's in residence will have the opportunity then to display their work as the ending process of them being there in our community working. And then it will continue to rotate, and the building itself will become this living organism that is constantly changing shape and constantly being new and updated with the artwork of the artists that are working there. We're going to be working with the local schools and the artists, depending on their needs for themselves individually. We would be working with them to hopefully subsidize their arts residency if they needed that, through working relationships with our schools. There might be cases where there was an artist who just wanted to come and completely focus in the studio and just spend their time there. They would then pay a market rate for being in there, versus if we had an artist that couldn't afford to do that but was willing to work with us, then we would set them up with after school programs and teaching artist work in our community in a way that we could help plug them into the community. In working with Northern Forest Center, they're very excited about creating a model here that could then be replicated in other places throughout their region to help address this really important need for housing that targets the working professionals, and that this is a way to do it where we're really creating a space that's is attractive to that group, because we know through research data that a vibrant creative community is something that working professionals not only want, but they demand. And when we're competing for the working professionals to move into our area or to stay in our area, if they're already there, if they're students for graduating, that in order for them to stay or to come to us, that we're competing with other places that have very vibrant creative communities. And so we're not in a vacuum. We have to do this in order to compete with other areas, and the market research is showing us that. So this is a very exciting project in St. Johnsbury. We're now 2 years into it. We're just about to break ground on construction. We're hoping by the end of 2024, we're actually going to have this ready to roll. And in 2025, hopefully have artists and residents there in the building working and working within our communities. I would say I just sat through a presentation with Kevin Chu of the Vermont Prosperity Project, where they've identified the need for us to address the workforce issues is going to be inviting in new workers into our community, getting our our community members who are here to stay. In order to do that, we're going to have to create places like this to meet the needs. And so this is a place where arts, culture, and creativity can play a direct role in solving the housing crisis by working with developers. And we're hoping this can be a pilot that can be replicated with other communities, other developers across the state. I think that's what I had to share. I don't know, Susan, in terms of question and answer, if we want to do that now or if we want to wait, but I think that was what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, we'll just have a couple more slides and then we'll do questions at the end, I think.
Okay.
But I'm trying to make it stick to call this arts integrated housing. So we'll see if that catches on. It's a really great project and it's a great example. All of these are great examples of how the creative sector can really be models for the rest of the state, right? Things are created, incubated in our creative sector, and then we can do a great job of sharing those success stories to see how we can all be improving Vermont for everyone. So we've thrown a lot of data at you, and we'll just recap the highlights and the numbers. The arts and culture, one of Vermont's top 3 largest sectors, over 3% of the overall economy, over 10,000 jobs. Creative experiences in our state drive spending. 79% of non-local attendees came specifically to the state for an arts and culture experience. Locals are spending $34.53 per person on top of admission, and non-locals are spending over $50 per person on top of admission every time they buy a ticket. The creative sector builds Vermont's communities. 87% of attendees are saying that arts and culture events inspire a sense of community pride in their communities. And we all need that as we're going to continue to grow in Vermont. So what are some ways that you all can be using this data? The first I'll talk about is our impact calculator. If someone would just put a link to that in the chat, that would be great. Americans for the Arts has created a Vermont-specific impact calculator. You can go to the link in the chat to calculate the impact that your organization and your work has on our Vermont economy. So you put in your organization's, your nonprofit organization's total expenditures to determine your economic impact in terms of jobs, household income, local government revenue, state government revenue, federal tax revenue. The calculator is customized for the state of Vermont with all of this Vermont specific data that they collected by Americans for the Arts. And it's a really interesting tool that can help you tell the story of the impact that your organization has. So I hope you'll check that out and let us know how you're using it. That it's great to have that as a kind of fun tool to see. It's not abstract, like we have the data and we can use it and understand our impact. So like all nonprofits, arts and culture organizations have a public purpose to make their cultural product broadly accessible so everyone can share in its benefits. And like all nonprofits, arts and culture organizations depend on financial support from the government and the private sector to deliver on that promise. We're in a time, however, where many leaders feel challenged to fund the arts. Shrinking budgets, mandates to prioritize jobs and economic growth, and pressing community development issues can make for difficult decision-making. But AAP6 brings a welcome message. When we invest in the arts, we are investing in an industry that strengthens the economy and builds more livable communities. Investing in the creative sector helps solve the challenges and the pressures that we are all facing in our state. So we're asking you all to help us spread the word. If you work in a nonprofit, include some of its data in your newsletter or your annual appeal. We can all try to use social media for good news and share these amazing data points online. You can also contact your elected representatives. You could write your member of Congress and let them know how the creative sector makes a difference in Vermont. And you can call or email your state representatives and let them know the impact your organization is having in your local area using the impact calculator. And Vermont is a unique state in that many of all of our elected officials, statewide elected officials, are very accessible and they want to know what's happening. So you can reach out to them. All of their emails are available on the legislature website. We didn't talk about this, but Catherine, can you put a link to the advocacy page in the chat? You can go to our website and find out who your reps are and how to contact them. They want to know what's up and they want to be invited to things, and they are really accessible here in the state. And most importantly, you can use this data to tell your own story. We want to be telling the story of the impact all of our work has, including the numbers, but not just the numbers. So always pairing the numbers with stories is the way to go. Numbers are fine, but the quote from a kid who attended your summer camp and whose life has changed, that's way better. And that tells the human side of what we all know is true about the work that we do. So using this data as a starting point to share those individual stories of impact has a really powerful end result as more and more people come to understand the deep impact that our sector has on our entire state and its people. So the biggest takeaway of all of this data is that strengthening Vermont's creative economy will strengthen Vermont's overall economy. And it's important never to lose sight of the fact that the arts in Vermont strengthen our economy, but they really strengthen our communities. So thank you all for joining us today. I'd be happy to take some questions. And in addition to questions, if people would like to share some examples of the creative economy at work in your own areas, we would love to hear that as well. So if folks want to ask questions, we can use the raise hand button. I think Deirdre's going to return us to being able to all see each other in our regular Zoom screens. And thanks for sticking with us through all of this data. This is a lot of information and a lot of good information, and we're happy to share it with you. So I don't think I saw any questions in the chat, which must mean that, you know, we're just laying it out there really clearly. If people do have questions, oh yes, great. Raise, I can say you could use the raise hand function, but Brian, go ahead with a question or an example.
Hi there, Susan, Jody, thank you so much. Newish to the area. I just have a question that may or may not be relevant, and I apologize if this is only for nonprofit arts but organizations. But the series Wednesday is set in Jericho, Vermont, but it's shot in Romania. What are the known obstacles to shooting in Vermont, and how can that hopefully change? Recently shot a pilot and currently pitching a series based on the town of Grafton.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's a great question, and thanks for the work you're doing in that realm. I will talk about that a little now. I'll also say that the film industry is one of the Creative Network's legislative priorities for the year. So next week at this time, we're going to have another webinar where we're going to be talking specifically about the legislative priorities of the Vermont Creative Network. Building the film industry in Vermont is one of those priorities for this year. And we've been collecting a lot of data and reporting. The Arts Council worked with many external folks to put together a report to the legislature last year. And we also have taken that data, taken those conversations, and are trying to present something this year that is a focused approach to grow the film industry in a way that's unique to Vermont, with knowing that we are not going to be competitive with states like Georgia and New York, even Massachusetts, in terms of film production and tax incentives. But there are things that we can do in our state that are really concrete ways that we can just make it easier to film here. Some of that is just having a database of where to film, where the resources are, having a person to call that will answer the phone, who can help you with what to do. So we're going to be going into more detail about that next week at the webinar, and I hope you'll come back for that. But it is something that we're looking at as both a driver of our local economies, but also a way. We didn't really talk about this today, but I think a way that the creative sector can really look to the economic futures of Vermont and what is possible here. I think especially with something like film, I know I at least am, talk film industry, right? You think about productions that are like big camera crews in a field, lots and lots of people. That does happen and it's great. And there is a future in digital media using generative AI and some new film production techniques that is much smaller scale, in the sense that you don't need like a huge field in productions to do it, but you do need a lot of technical expertise, and you need internet, and you need access to people who are doing it at the highest levels. So, I think Vermont, this is a long-winded way of saying, yes, we're looking at film production incentives in the state, and we're trying to look really into the future about what role Vermont can have in a way that's unique and sustainable for us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so question from Lisa in the chat was, I wonder how we can better support K through 12 arts educators to ensure we have graduates who go into creative careers in Vermont. And I think that question was from Lisa Bressler, who is doing great work on just that around the state. And I don't want to do it. Jody, do you want to feel free to jump in, Jody, if you want to chime into any of these things too.
Am I back on? I just want to check.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had Ann Campbell, Catamount's Director of Arts Education, on here to have this conversation with us. I can only share from you from an advocacy standpoint. I think this is an area where we really do need to focus our efforts through storytelling. That our legislators and the funders that we're working with, they really connect with the stories when it comes to our children in the K through 12. So in order to get to the structural issues, which there are definitely structural funding issues that are playing out, and it's not just K through 12, we're seeing the Vermont State University system as well. But those structural issues, in order to get to the point where we can have conversations about the funding, about the systems, we need to be sharing those individual stories and getting people engaged with it. And so I think directing our narrative and our conversations around the stories, but then being able to pull back and having the advocacy agenda there. One of the areas that I know we're working really hard in the Northeast Kingdom on is similar to other areas that we've had a lot of the arts educators in our region have retired. And so we actually have a workforce connection between the need for teaching artists and the supply, and how do we address that structurally? Because even when we can identify funding sources, having folks that are ready to step into those roles are a challenge. So those are just a few of my thoughts, and if specific to what we're doing out of the Northeast Kingdom, but bringing that back to the storytelling. And I would guess, Lisa, you would be in a fabulous position to create narrative and stories to touch the heartstrings of that we could then connect to this new data through 86 and start bringing those two pieces together.
I'll add too that in addition to people going into creative careers in Vermont, I think we need to be expanding the conversation to the impact of creative learning on developing people who can be successful in our modern workforce. You know, I think often there are segments, right? You either get kind of pushed down one path or pushed down another path, and you know, technical education or creative education or, you know, academia. But really we want, for good education and for good citizens, right? We need that all to be integrated. Some of the most creative people in the world are people who are in technical jobs, right? People who are using their creativity every day to solve problems. So we want everyone to have access to those creative educational experiences to build those creative thinking muscles so that we do have the workforce that can meet the needs of the world we live in now and be prepared for whatever is coming in the future too. Okay, so another question from Emily is there a chance of changing building codes so new housing or commercial development is required to include the arts, whether studio or gallery space? Emily, I like the way you're thinking, because one of the focuses of the Creative Network is really looking at some of those like larger systemic things that we might not think of as creative issues. But I will say building codes, zoning regulations, that is a very hot topic of changing zoning regulations. I think is an important table for us as members of the creative sector to be sitting at. There are really interesting models happening, and I think there are a lot of statewide programs. We'll talk about some of them. I feel like this is a preview, but we'll talk about some of them at next week's legislative advocacy agenda webinar as well. But there's some really great statewide programs where the arts and culture are part of the determination about whether you're going to get state support or funding. So making sure that the arts and culture are part of those conversations is great. And also there's a lot happening at local levels too that we want to empower people to be part of as well. So please come back for next week too. We'll talk a little bit about that at next week's webinar and hopefully give folks some inspiration to go out and go to your select board meetings and advocate for changing your building codes and zoning regulations.
So Susan, I'll also chime in on this one because I think this is part of this pilot project that we're doing at 560 is how do we work directly with private industry that's not in the not-for-profit, but necessarily, or to address a need in our community. And through the housing side, a big part of this has been involving the town and involving the local municipality in the project from the very beginning, if both from an economic development standpoint, but also to make sure that the zoning and those local regulations, which there are some that are statewide, but there's also a lot of that is through local control and through local zoning board or select boards, local zoning commissions, and working with them proactively so that as we look at addressing the housing issue, which is going to be very large and going to take a lot of work statewide, it's going to be a lot of work that has to play out in those local offices. So we're working on that right now. And there is no doubt by involving those entities early in the process and having them come on as your partner it creates a different scenario in terms of when you get to trying to have a result of a project that can actually get built. So.
Great. And we have, I think, one last question in the chat. And I think it was about funding opportunities for artists. You know, what are the opportunities for artists and arts organizations to be funded and supported in their journeys and as they're working on creation as well? I think part of the comment is talking about the size and scope of statewide funding that's available, both through the Vermont Arts Council and through Vermont Humanities and some of our other statewide funding organizations, public funding organizations. I will say that, so at the Vermont Arts Council, we are always working to increase the amount of funding that we have to be able to grant out to communities, both through state and federal funding increases and also through partnerships with private foundations, private donors, philanthropy, who can supplement our grant making ability. So that is I think a multi-pronged question, right? I always believe in advocating at the federal level to what we want to be doing is increasing the appropriation for the National Endowment for the Arts. We're always advocating at the state level to increase appropriations there. And while we're continuing to increase the amount of money that we are looking to grant directly to the field, we're also working at these statewide and federal policy levels that can create the conditions for artists to be successful in the state. When we talk to artists and organizations, a lot of the things we hear are really similar. A lot of their challenges are really similar to the challenges that we're all facing: cost of housing, cost of health insurance, inability to find housing at all, you know, the higher cost of higher education. These are challenges that are challenges for everyone, and they're challenges for artists. And I like to imagine a world where if an artist didn't have to worry about paying for their health insurance, what could they create and what world could they be living in? So that's the role of the Vermont Creative Network, is to think about some of those larger policy challenges, and then see how we as a sector can gather together to advocate for those changes. The arts and culture sector, of the creative sector overall, has a huge ability to have political influence, right? And to have the influence of voting and to be involved in your local level, state level, federal level. So I think there's a lot of untapped power among us where we can gather together and make our voices heard. I'm seeing a few more questions in the chat. How can we as a sector show up better for marginalized artists and creatives? One thing I hear often in conversations with BIPOC community is that people feel intimidated to apply for grants and support, and that they get discouraged by eligibility requirements, that they're often overlooked by these opportunities, and they don't hear about these opportunities in the first place. Thank you for raising that. It's a very important topic, and one that we are working on and have more work to do, including an outreach specifically to historically under-resourced communities across the state. So that is important work that all of us need to be doing. And the Vermont Arts Council is working to decrease the complexity of our applications as much as possible, and to do everything we can to make it as easy as it is to get the funding. I feel really passionately that state and federal money, it's not just like magic funding that's out there. It's actually all of our funding, all of our money, because we all pay taxes. So the way that works, right, is we pay taxes, we elect representatives, and they make determinations about where our tax dollars should go. We want to be advocating for them to make those determinations that those tax dollars should go to support the creative sector. And then when it does, we want to be working to decrease the barriers to getting that funding. So it doesn't concentrate the funding in more resourced groups and larger organizations, which it usually does. So one thing the Arts Council has done and will continue to do are grant seeker workshops. And we'd love to do some specific workshops to specific communities as well. So if people have ideas, connections, partners, we work a lot with some great partner organizations that are reaching out directly to BIPOC communities. If you have ideas on other ones, we would love to hear them, and we would love to be in those places where people are living and working, specifically BIPOC communities, so that we can ensure that there is equal access to these resources and that we're supporting BIPOC Vermonters as they are an important and crucial part of our creative work across the state. I'm just trying to follow the chat here. And a good point from Sarah about the data on the impact of BIPOC creatives. So interesting that you brought that up. That was not something that AEP6 was collecting, but it is something that the Creative Network has identified as real gaps in our research. So we're exploring a new project, which we are going to be searching for funding for, potentially with partners, academic partners, so that we can continue to do more research that gets at more of that data. I think Sarah brought up a great point about that data. We don't have that data right now, and we want to, so that we can both tell that story of the amazing impact of BIPOC creatives across the state, and also advocate for more resources to support its growth, the growth of the BIPOC creative sector as well. And Sarah put the link to the Vermont Professionals of Color Network in the chat too. They've been really important partners on our Vermont Creative Futures grants that we did, and they do amazing work across the state. So if you're not familiar with them, please check them out as well. All right. Any other questions or things that I missed? Oh, now this is good. Now the chat is going. Oh, a question about the Vermont changes at Vermont State Colleges. So how are you supporting Vermont State Colleges to continue serving students who are interested in studying the arts despite the changes that are happening at Vermont State Colleges around arts and arts access? So we are always working, and we believe really strongly that it is important. Arts education is crucial at all ages and stages of life, and that all people who are learning in a higher education setting have access to a diversified artistic and creative opportunities for their growth too. So we are supporting the communities throughout the state, both the towns that are related, that are where the state colleges campus sites are located. We work closely in all of those towns, and we are wanting to make sure that all students have access to all of the amazing resources of the state, and that if you're being educated in Vermont, that you're really connected to everything that's happening here, both within the state colleges system and with the communities that surround those campuses as well. All right, we're coming up on 12 o'clock, so I want to be conscious of all of we're all so busy doing all the good work I just talked about that I'm sure we all have to get back to it. Well, thank you, Jody, as our co-host here. Thank you to do you want to say anything else, Jody, or as you wrap up?
I wanted to thank everyone for participating, and thank the Vermont Arts Council staff for doing the amazing work they do. And lastly, just the more we can get out there and be in the room, and that's any room, whether it's at a state, regional, or local level, the more that we're sitting in that room, the more change we're going to influence. I think there's a real correlation there. So we got to get in those rooms. So I appreciate you all being in this room with us today.
Thanks, Jody. And a reminder that next Thursday, you can register for our creative sector advocacy webinar as well, where we will talk specifically about getting in those rooms and what we're going to do when we're in there. So thank you all for joining us. We'll post these updated slides on our website, and we'll post the recording of the session there as well. It'll take a few days to get that up there. And we look forward to working together to continue to build our creative economy across the state. Thanks, everyone.